Usually when you think of a modern multinational corporation like a Fortune 500 IT giant, you imagine a kind of fortress.
Right, but not a literal stone fortress with a moat, more like a fortress built out of strict corporate policies, compliance protocols, and HR infrastructure.
Exactly. When you walk into one of those massive glass buildings, there's just this inherent expectation of safety. You assume that if a boundary is crossed, if someone breaks the rules, an alarm is going to go off immediately.
Because the whole system is fundamentally designed to neutralize threats and protect the employees. You have compliance audits, dedicated officers, anonymous tip lines.
Right, the digital paper trails.
Exactly. The baseline assumption for anyone entering the workforce today is that the safety nets are pretty much foolproof or, at the very least, highly reactive to danger.
But then you step into the reality of what reportedly just happened at a Tata Consultancy Services unit, a business process unit in Nashik, Maharashtra.
Yeah, and suddenly you realize what happens when that alarm system isn't just broken, but completely dismantled from the inside out.
It's just chilling. We are looking at a corporate governance failure that is staggering in its scale and its duration, frankly. So today, we're taking a deep dive into a profoundly somber and disturbing topic.
It really is.
As of today, April 14th, 2026, we're looking at a stack of sources, a comprehensive forensic report, multiple first information reports from the police, official company policy documents, and, a wave of ongoing news dispatches.
And together, they reveal a total collapse of institutional safeguards. It's a systemic breakdown at nearly every single level of oversight.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is to look impartially at the established facts and the ongoing investigations here. We really need to examine how a multi-billion-dollar IT giant developed such a devastating blind spot.
Because this wasn't just a fleeting lapse in judgment. This was a highly organized pattern of alleged sexual harassment, exploitation, and coercion. And it operated completely unchecked for 4 entire years.
4 years. From February 2022 all the way to March 2026.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of this. Because the core contradiction that frames this entire story is this jarring disconnect between the public corporate narrative and the horrifying reality on the ground in Nashik.
Right, the illusion of safety.
Yeah. So, according to the source documents, TCS has a very explicitly documented POSH policy. And for anyone listening who might not be familiar with Indian corporate law, POSH stands for the Prevention of Sexual Harassment.
It's a legally mandated framework in India.
Exactly. And they publicly tout a strict zero-tolerance approach. They have an internal complaints committee or an ICC set up precisely to field these kinds of grievances.
I mean, even the chairman of Tata Sons, N. Chandrasekaran, recently released a public statement expressing deep anguish over the allegations. He loudly reiterated that zero-tolerance stance.
But the reality inside that specific branch was an absolute nightmare for the women working there.
It was. And to understand the depth of that nightmare, we have to look at how the exact mechanisms designed to protect employees were structurally weaponized to silence them instead.
Weaponized how?
Well, when you analyze the forensic evidence compiled by the Special Investigation Team, the SIT, the corporate illusion of zero tolerance just immediately shattered.
Oh, totally. The most damning piece of forensic evidence they uncovered is this digital trail of 78 distinct emails plus an extensive chat conversation.
78 emails over a 4-year period.
Yeah. And these were sent by a senior manager at the Nashik office directly to the assistant general manager, a woman named Ashwini Chinani, who is based in Pune.
And we really need to pause on Ashwini Chinani's role for a second, because she wasn't just some random mid-level manager who got CC'd on an email by mistake.
Right, she was the delivery partner.
Exactly. And crucially, a designated member of the company's POSH committee. Under Indian law, that internal complaints committee is endowed with the powers of a civil court. They can gather evidence, summon witnesses.
So she was the exact person empowered and legally mandated to handle these emergencies.
The responsibility rested directly on her desk. Those 78 emails detailed the ongoing systematic abuse happening right on the floor of the Nashik unit. They were desperate, glaring red flags.
What did she do?
According to the investigation, she did absolutely nothing to trigger a formal POSH audit.
Nothing at all.
She didn't dispatch an investigative team from Pune. She didn't suspend the accused. In fact, the SIT's remand report quotes her explicitly discouraging a complainant.
This part is just sickening.
When approached with evidence of the harassment, Chinani allegedly told the victim, "Why do you want to get highlighted? Let it go. Leave it."
I mean, imagine you are 22 years old, experiencing severe harassment, and the very committee member designed by law to protect you tells you to just drop it so you don't highlight yourself.
It completely paralyzes you as an employee.
It's like this isn't just a broken smoke detector in a corporate building. This is the building's fire marshal actively turning off the alarms, locking the fire exits, and telling the staff to ignore the smoke while the building literally burns.
That's exactly what it is. And the institutional failure becomes even more grim when you look at the local HR leadership physically present in Nashik.
Right, because local HR is supposed to be your immediate, accessible first line of defense if you're in distress.
Exactly. But the police investigation places a massive focus on the local HR manager, a woman named Nida Khan. The allegations paint a picture of an HR leader who completely inverted her professional mandate.
Yeah, the police claim that instead of aiding the victims or, forwarding their complaints up the corporate ladder, Khan functioned as what they termed the lady captain of this abuse ring.
The lady captain.
Yeah. When victims tried to report the harassment locally, their complaints just vanished into a black hole. Investigators state she actively abetted the perpetrators.
She shielded them from corporate oversight and ensured the victims remain entirely isolated.
So because the HR department had effectively neutralized all internal reporting, the perpetrators were totally emboldened. They knew they were operating under a protective umbrella.
And over a 4-year period, this lack of friction allowed a localized case of workplace harassment to mutate. It became a highly organized, deeply predatory syndicate of exploitation.
And the gravity of this abuse really comes into sharp focus when we analyze the victims themselves.
Right. The demographics are central to understanding how this syndicate operated so effectively. We are looking at young women, mostly aged between 18 and 25.
Just starting their careers.
Exactly. Many were working in junior-level, high-turnover roles, like making calls to auto loan holders. Their compensation was roughly between 18,000 and 25,000 rupees a month.
Which, in today's economy, makes them incredibly vulnerable, both financially and professionally.
Oh, absolutely. For many of these young women, a corporate job at a brand like TCS is a lifeline for their entire family.
So the fear of losing that income is a massive leverage point.
And the perpetrators fundamentally understood and exploited that leverage. They were senior team leads, individuals like Tausif Attar and Nashik, both of whom have now been arrested, by the way.
Right. And according to the detailed first information reports, the FIRs, their methods were highly coordinated. This wasn't a scenario of, isolated inappropriate comments slipping out in the break room.
No, it was a structured grooming module. The accused allegedly created dedicated WhatsApp groups specifically to screen and target vulnerable women.
It's so calculated.
They actively analyzed the financial and emotional distress of junior female employees, particularly from the Hindu community, to identify those who lacked the resources or confidence to fight back.
And the mechanics of the coercion detailed in the police reports are genuinely horrifying. The FIRs outline a baseline pattern where women were subjected to obscene remarks, inappropriate physical touching, and constant stalking, inside and outside the office.
But the syndicate's tactics escalated far beyond what you'd consider standard workplace harassment.
Yeah. The reports detail how women were systematically lured into physical relationships under false, manipulative promises of marriage.
And once they were trapped in these dynamics, they were allegedly blackmailed. The perpetrators used compromising photographs and videos to ensure their continued silence and, well, absolute compliance on the office floor.
I mean, Nashik, for instance, allegedly completely hid the fact that he was already married and had 2 children while psychologically and physically exploiting one of the victims.
And this level of deceit has actually led to formal rape charges under Section 69 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita.
Right, let's clarify that for the listener. The Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, or BNS, is the new comprehensive legal code replacing the colonial-era Indian Penal Code.
Correct. And Section 69 specifically criminalizes sexual intercourse secured through deceitful means. That explicitly includes false promises of employment or marriage.
Wow. And adding another deeply complex and sensitive layer to these allegations is the element of religious coercion.
Yeah, and we really must treat this aspect with careful, impartial gravity. These are severe claims currently under active investigation by the SIT.
Exactly. The FIRs state that once the victims were psychologically broken down and professionally cornered through blackmail, they were pressured to adopt the specific religious practices of the accused.
Victims have formally alleged they were forced to observe Ramzan fasts, recite kalmas, offer namaz on the office terrace during their work breaks.
on the office terrace?
Yes, and even consume beef against their deeply held personal beliefs and religious customs.
It sounds less like a standard corporate environment and more like a coercive cult-like setting operating right under the nose of a global brand.
It really does.
But here's where I have to push back a bit, or at least ask the question that I think anyone listening to this is probably screaming at their device right now.
Right, the obvious question.
You would think in an office of 147 people, someone witnessing this would bypass the local HR completely. I mean, if Nida Khan is blocking the door, why not just send an email straight to the corporate headquarters in Mumbai? Or call the National Corporate Tip Line?
Well, while that is the logical assumption from the outside, it completely ignores the psychological reality these women were in and the localized power structure they were trapped inside.
How so?
When the person threatening to terminate your job is your direct manager, and the person supposed to protect you is the HR lead standing right next to him, the local system feels omnipotent.
That makes sense.
The victims were repeatedly threatened that if they attempted to escalate the issue beyond the Nashik office, they would not only face severe professional retaliation, but their compromising photos would be released.
Oh, God.
When you are making 20,000 rupees a month in a smaller city, the threat of losing your livelihood and facing public social ruin is just paralyzing. The corporate headquarters in Mumbai might physically be just a few hours away, but psychologically, it might as well be on another planet.
That makes a terrifying kind of sense. The local management had essentially erected a total information blackout around the Nashik unit,
Exactly.
which explains why the eventual collapse of this syndicate didn't come from a corporate audit or an internal whistleblower or even an ICC intervention. Because the internal fire exits were all locked, the smoke eventually had to leak out of the building.
It did. The catalyst for exposing this entire operation actually came from outside the corporate bubble entirely.
Really? How?
In February 2026, a local political worker in Nashik began noticing that a Hindu woman working at the TCS unit had radically and suddenly changed her personal religious practices.
Like observing the fasts out of nowhere.
Right. Sensing coercion, this individual bypassed corporate entirely and tipped off the Nashik City Police, stating that something amiss was happening inside the facility.
And the response from the Nashik police is where the scale of this corporate failure becomes glaringly obvious.
It's incredible.
When Police Commissioner Sandeep Karnik and ACP Sandeep Mitke received this tip, they didn't just, knock on the front door of the BPO and ask HR for a comment.
No, because they realized that if the local management was potentially compromised, a standard police inquiry would just give the syndicate time to delete the WhatsApp groups, erase the CCTV footage, and intimidate the victims into silence.
So what did they do?
Law enforcement launched a full-scale undercover sting operation.
Think about the sheer logistical difficulty of this. Here's where it gets really interesting. We usually hear about undercover stings to take down drug cartels or organized crime syndicates.
Right.
The fact that law enforcement had to infiltrate a Fortune 500 IT office just to bypass a rogue HR department is absolutely mind-blowing.
The operation they put together is practically unprecedented in the modern Indian corporate sector. The police carefully deployed 6 to 8 female police officers to go deeply undercover inside the BPO facility.
Inside the actual office.
Yeah. And to gain unfettered access to the entire floor without raising suspicion, these officers were disguised as housekeeping staff and low-level administrative workers.
Wow.
For 40 days, these undercover officers scrubbed floors, served tea, cleaned desks, and covertly monitored every inch of the facility.
40 days of continuous embedded surveillance inside a corporate office. I mean, the tension of maintaining that cover, knowing that a single slip-up could cause the HR department to wipe the servers, must have been immense.
But the brilliance of embedding them as invisible support staff is that it gave them access to spaces where guards are usually let down. They were able to quietly attend meetings, observe the power dynamics at the workstations.
They could actually see who was talking to who.
Exactly. They meticulously tracked the specific behaviors of the senior team leads. They personally witnessed the inappropriate proximity, the verbal harassment, and the forced religious activities happening on the office terrace.
That is just incredible police work.
It really is.
Yeah.
And more importantly, this covert access allowed law enforcement to independently corroborate the victim's claims and secure over 40 critical CCTV footage clips directly from the office's surveillance system.
So they gathered an irrefutable mountain of evidence without ever alerting the HR managers who were allegedly running the racket.
Exactly. And once that surveillance net was full, the hammer finally fell. Starting on March 26, the police overtly moved in.
They filed 9 separate FIRs across different local police stations, right, just to handle the sheer volume of complaints.
Yes. 7 core accused were arrested on the spot, including the mastermind team leads and that Pune-based AGM, Ashwini Chainani.
What about the HR manager, Nida Khan?
Well, realizing the sting had occurred, she absconded, triggering an active police manhunt.
Wow. The exposure of this hidden syndicate via a police sting has now forced the entire Indian IT sector to really look in the mirror.
Yeah, what started as a localized crime in Maharashtra has rapidly transformed into a massive national debate. It's about corporate accountability, the effectiveness of POSH laws, and fundamental workplace safety.
And to give you a sense of the scale of this fallout, it has completely fractured along political lines.
Yeah.
Now, we aren't here to endorse either of these political viewpoints. We are strictly looking at the structural facts of the corporate failure here.
Right, impartially.
Exactly. But looking at the sheer polarity of the reactions shows you how much of a powder keg this has become. On one side, BJP leaders have publicly seized on the religious coercion elements.
Yeah, they've been referring to the syndicate's actions as corporate jihad, demanding maximal punishment and pointing to this as a coordinated effort to target vulnerable Hindu women.
And examining the other side of the political spectrum, Shiv Sena UBT leader Priyanka Chaturvedi has fiercely slammed TCS's corporate response.
She criticized their zero-tolerance statement as being casually dismissive and, honestly, completely tone-deaf to the structural failure that occurred.
Yeah, she argued that the company appeared to fight hard at multiple levels to suppress the story and mitigate PR damage, rather than proactively protect the victims.
And her broader point was a warning. If this catastrophic level of HR and corporate governance failure can happen inside a prestigious blue-chip giant, the entire tech industry ought to be deeply worried about what is happening in the shadows of their own companies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it isn't just politicians reacting. The workers themselves are mobilizing. The Nascent Information Technology Employees Senate, or NITES, which is a major union representing IT professionals, has formally petitioned the Ministry of Labor.
They aren't just demanding justice for the specific victims in Nashik. They are demanding a sweeping, time-bound, nationwide POSH audit across all IT companies, specifically targeting large multinational organizations operating in Maharashtra.
They want to see if this is happening everywhere.
Exactly. The Knights petition gets to the very heart of the structural flaw this case exposes. They want independent investigators to forensically examine all past sexual harassment complaints across the sector.
To see if there is a systemic pattern of HR personnel burying complaints to protect senior management.
Right. They are pointing to a phenomenon we can categorize as the Tier 2 paradox.
Okay, so if Knights is pointing to a Tier 2 paradox, I'm guessing that means a massive corporation behaves completely differently in a smaller regional city than it does at its shiny global headquarters.
Pretty much.
Like, they want the cheap labor, but don't want to pay for the expensive oversight.
That captures the economic driver perfectly. Over the past few years, massive tech companies have increasingly expanded their operations away from major, expensive metropolitan hubs like Mumbai, Pune, or Bangalore.
Moving into Tier 2 cities like Nashik.
Exactly.
Right.
The primary goal is to drastically cut operational and real estate costs while tapping into fresh, less expensive talent pools. But the paradox is this. While these corporations easily export their glossy branding, their sophisticated software, and their corporate logos to these smaller cities, they routinely fail to export their rigorous corporate oversight. They don't send their senior compliance officers, and they don't set up the necessary cultural checks and balances.
So they build the modern office building, wire the high-speed internet, but they leave the corporate immune system back at headquarters in Mumbai.
Yeah.
They hire local management and just blindly trust them to run the floor.
Precisely. Without the constant physical scrutiny that is naturally present in a global headquarters environment, these remote facilities can quickly devolve into isolated fiefdoms.
It's like the Wild West.
If local management, like the team leads and the HR manager in Nashik, decides to consolidate power and ignore the rules, they can operate with near total impunity. The mandated corporate ethos was allegedly stripped away and replaced by a predatory local hierarchy.
The policy manual existed as a PDF on a server somewhere, but the actual people hired to enforce it became the architects of the abuse.
That's exactly it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating your own professional life? It is a stark, unforgiving reminder that a company's culture isn't what is written in a glossy manual on the corporate intranet.
It's not a beautifully engraved plaque sitting in the main lobby.
Right. A company's true culture is whatever the local manager allows to happen on a Tuesday afternoon on the floor.
Yeah.
If the person physically guarding the gates is the one holding the keys to the abuse, all the zero-tolerance policies in the world are completely meaningless.
That is the ultimate devastating tragedy of the Nashik unit. A facility that was supposed to be a sanctuary of modern employment, governed by the strictest zero-tolerance policies of a global giant, became a 4-year nightmare for young, vulnerable women.
Yeah.
It heavily underscores that a system is only as strong and only as moral as the human beings tasked with upholding it. The simple fact that it required an external 40-day police sting to do the job of an internal corporate HR department is a permanent indictment of the entire compliance framework.
It really is. To wrap up this deep dive, we've looked at how the corporate illusion of zero tolerance was systematically shattered by 78 ignored emails and an HR black hole.
We examined the terrifying gravity of the grooming module, the coercion, and the systemic manipulation of young women who were just trying to earn a living to support their families.
We unpacked how it took a 40-day undercover police infiltration, using the company's own office surveillance against the perpetrators to finally expose the truth.
And we are now watching the entire IT sector grapple with the resulting political and industrial fallout.
It's a lot to take in.
As we close our analysis, there's a final, lingering question we all need to deeply consider. This case has violently forced us to look at the dark underbelly of corporate expansion, but it also leaves us with a chilling thought for the future of remote and decentralized work.
What's that?
As massive tech companies continue to spread their workforce further and further away from central headquarters, creating thousands of isolated satellite offices to save on costs, how many other Nashiks are operating right now, hiding in plain sight behind a perfectly drafted corporate policy?
Wow. That is a profoundly terrifying thought to leave on. A fortress is truly only safe if you can trust the guards walking the walls. Thank you for joining us on this heavy but absolutely necessary deep dive into a story that demands our attention. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you next time.